Hi friends, welcome again. We have been talking about humanity, poverty, kindness, and so many livelihoods in our life. But there are punishments, cruel and unusual. How many types are there? I think there are 15 types of tortures. The human mind has long been capable of dreaming up new and terrible ways to punish alleged transgressors, villains, witches, and anyone else who was unlucky enough to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. We are all familiar with the old standbys hanging, burning, stoning, yawn. What if someone really wrongs you, like steals your sheep, or somehow must have caused a crop failure, or something because they gave you a shifty look that one time? Throughout the ages, some extremely brutal methods of torture and execution have come and gone, and there are a few that have not yet gone too. Read and discuss about the 15 terrifying types of torture, but please don't try this at home. The first one is upright jerker. There is a pulley and so many things. The upright jerker was an interesting twist on a classic execution method, hanging. While it is true, standby all around the world leaves much to be desired in terms of effectiveness. Depending on the weight of the person, rope, trapdoor, and numerous other factors, it can be a very slow or awkward way to die. The natural solutions: do it backwards. The upright jerker was a modified hanging system that used heavily weights and pulleys to quickly jerk the condemned into the air. It was hopefully this would be a more effective way to break the neck quickly, but it didn't always work as planned. Falling. What's the first thing that comes to mind when someone wrongs with you? Throw them off a cliff. It is easy. And this has been a simple solution to unwanted nuisance for centuries. While it's largely fallen out of the fashion, Iran still employs this method for state executions. Next is the crushed by elephant. This is a weirdly specific method of execution, but you can't argue with its effectiveness. As you might guess, it was common in areas where elephants are naturally found, primarily in South and Southeast Asia. Elephants were often trained in order to ensure that the trampling was as brutal as possible. Next element is Ling Chi. Ling Chi, also known as a slow slicing or death by 1,000 cuts, was a method of torturous execution practiced in China. The condemned was tied to a post and bits of skin and limbs were gradually removed one by one, usually culminating in a final cut to the heart or decapitation. It was used as early as the 10th century and continued for nearly 1,000 years. Luckily, it was banned in 1905. The blood eagle. The blood eagle comes from Nordic legends of Vikings executions. The condemned's back was slashed so as to give access to the ribs, which were then broken and twisted upward to look like wings. To add injury to injury, salt was poured into the wound. And as a final blow, the lungs were pulled out and draped over the ribbings for effect. Thankfully, there is debate about whether or not this practice actually existed, or if it is just the stuff of legend. Either way, it's terrifying that someone took the time to think this up. The next one is key hauling, was a type of punishment specifically for sailors dreamt up by the Dutch Navy in the late 16th century. Offenders were tied with rope and dragged underwater from one end of the ship to the other, while many died from the practice due to drowning or internal injuries. In theory, it wasn't always meant to be fatal. As a bonus, men who were punished by keel hauling were often cut mercilessly by barnacles on the ship's bottom keel and carried the scars with them for life if they lived that age. The next one is the boiling. Nowadays, boiling alive is a fate reserved for shellfish, but centuries ago it was a common method of execution from East Asia to England. The condemned was stripped and then placed in a vat or pot of boiling liquid, usually water, oil or tar, or for a more gruesome experience. The offender could be placed in a cool liquid and then heated to boiling. Records from the reign of Henry VIII show that some people were boiled for up to 2 hours before they finally died. Next one is the rat torture. Rat torture apparently lives on in the minds of creative types, as it has been featured recently in the film Too Fast, Too Furious and in the TV series Game of Thrones. In this terrifying and, I will admit, creative form of torture, a hungry and or deceased rat is placed in a bucket on the victim's bare stomach or chest. The bucket is then heated from the outside and the agitated rat chews its way through the unfortunate person's flesh and any organs it happens to encounter on its way out. Next one is the execution vans. China has made capital punishment shockingly efficient. It's little surprise really, considering that China conducts the most executions per year of any country in the world. A variety of crimes are punishable by death, including tax fraud, arson, and prostitution. Many executions in China are now performed in mobile execution units, vans that are equipped with restraints and drugs necessary for lethal injection. The vans, which look like typical police van, have been on the road of about a decade. There are dozens of them all over the country, dispensing lethal justice closer to the scenes of crimes. Not only are they cheaper than more traditional faculties, Chinese officials say, but they are more human than the other preferred method of execution, death by firing squad. The next one is the gridiron, was basically a grill for roasting people as one might expect. It looked like an iron grid and was placed over a fire or burning coals. Some people were even basted on oil first to ensure proper broiling, but take heart, they weren't eaten afterward probably. The next one is drawing and quartering. Drawing and quartering is one of the most infamous methods of cruel, unusual punishment. It is still difficult to believe it is an actual thing that was conceived by actual humans and happened to actual unfortunate souls. The punishment was first doled out in England in the 13th century. The accused was drawn, tied to a horse and dragged to the gallows and then usually hanged, maybe disemboweled or beheaded. Afterward, the condemned was quartered, that is, had his body split in quarters, sometimes by tying each limb to a different horse and having them run in opposite directions. This punishment was reserved for those guilty of treason and was abolished in 1867. The next one is strappado. Strappado is an uncomfortable form of torture that, unlike many of the others on this list, doesn't necessarily end in death. In Stapado, the guilty party is strung up by the wrists behind the head. The awkward angle is pretty much guaranteed to cause an agonized dislocation of the shoulders. But if it doesn't, weights may be added. Thought to have originated in medieval times during the Inquisition, Stapado has been used into the 21st century. Next one is the white torture. While the term white torture can mean any psychological torture in general, the meaning here is more literal. While torture is a type of sensory deprivation in which a prisoner's cell, clothes, and even food are entirely white. Guards wear all white. Lights are kept on 24 hours a day, and no words are spoken. No color is seen. It was documented in the case of Amir Fakrawar, who was arrested in his native Iran and subjected to white torture for some 8 months in 2004. While the physical pain of sensory deprivation is minimal compared to other tortures on this list, the psychological damage is beyond compare. Fakrawar was quoted as saying when he was released, he was not a normal person anymore and could no longer remember even the faces of the parents. The poena culei is the next punishment. The punishment of the sack or poena culei was another oddly specific form of execution. It was used in ancient Rome in cases of parricide or killing one's parents or other close family member. The condemned was sewn into a leather sack with a number of animals, including a dog, a monkey, a snake, and a rooster. Then the whole bag was tossed into a body of water. If the animals didn't kill the alleged murderer, drowning surely would be. The next one is scapism. Scapism was one of the worst and most painful, skin-crawling methods of torture. It was described by the Greeks as a punishment used by the Persians. And if there are to be believed, those Persians were insane. In this form of execution, the accused was trapped between two boats or in a hollowed out tree trunk and force-fed milk and honey. Okay, that part doesn't sound so bad. But the milk and honey diet eventually caused horrible diarrhea, which stayed within the wooden enclosure. The unfortunate condemned was smeared with more milk and honey and left out in the sun or near still water, where bugs would be attracted to the muck and rot and sweetness. The person would inevitably die either of dehydration, exposure, or bite and sting wounds. This is all about the punishment. Thanks for watching.